Good morning and a very warm welcome to you, you eager beavers. Very good to see so many of you at this early hour, given hopefully you all had lovely evenings last night. I see there are a few of you in the back, in that dark corner in the back right. That does not mean that you are allowed to fall asleep. Indeed, you'll be picked on for questions for being so cowardly, Peter Cooper. So I hope you all had a fabulous day yesterday and a lovely evening last night. Before I introduce this next session and explain how it's all going to work, I would like to say thank you to Pete Cooper at Hammerson for being such a tremendous support in putting the programme together, both yesterday and today, and briefing our panellists on exactly what to say. So it's his fault if this goes terribly badly, not mine. I have no responsibility whatsoever. So here we are, 9:30-ish, and we are going to kick off this morning's seminar programme with a session called Progress is Disruption and Change, Key Trends in Disrupting Retail. Now, there are no presentations, which for your eyes is good, but for your participation is bad. So we are really, really keen to get an engaging conversation with you as our audience participants. So the chair of this session will be coming to you, and if there are no hands up, then I suspect he might pick on one or two people. Like I say, back right-hand corner is the best place to start. So the chair of this session is Anthony Impey, who is the founder and CEO of Optimity, and he will explain a little bit about his organisation when he comes up here. Are you doing it from here? Or?
I'm going to do it from here.
From there, you can do it from there. And then we have Philip Beer, who is now a consultant advisor, but was formerly the owner and franchise owner of Tiger. So he bought Tiger, the very successful retailer, to the UK, and recently sold it back to the parent company. Nick Dryden, CEO of Shala. Yeah? All over the press in the last week with some of their biometric technology and really intriguing and fascinating stuff it is too. Stuart Hennell, Managing Director and co-founder of Watchfinder & Co. Karina Nobbs, who is a futurist. So she will look into the future and tell you everything that you need to know about what is going to happen in retail. Looking forward to your contribution, Karina. We're all looking for that answer. And Ben Perkins, who is the head of Consumer and Business Research at Deloitte. So without further ado, I will ask you, Anthony, to start the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and welcome everyone to this beautiful Thursday morning in Liverpool. When I heard that I was chairing the session of day two, I was warned that attendees of Revo were hard partiers, and that there may be some sore heads in the audience today. I set my expectations for today's panel that I wanted an audience of more than the number of panellists. So already today has been a great success for me. At 9:40 in the morning, that's fantastic news. Thank you very much, everyone, for turning up with hangovers or not. We have a fantastic panel here for you today to reinvigorate you and to work those hangovers away. To my right, I have Corinna from Holition, which is an amazing augmented reality company, one of my favourite companies in tech. Also to my right is Philip Beer from Beer Retail, who's done amazing things in the retail space with Tiger, and now moving on to new ventures. To my left, to my immediate left, Nick Dryden from Stala. For those of you who don't know, Stala was the term originally used for the dollar. So you learn something every day. Again, to my left, I have Stuart Hennell from Watchfinder, who has pioneered the sale of second-user watches online, and now on the high street. And then on my far left, Ben Perkins, Head of Consumer Biz Research at Deloitte. I'm going to ask each of my panellists to introduce themselves briefly and to talk about what they see as the key trends disrupting retail at the moment. Corinna, can I start with you?
I just realised I have a frog in my throat. So Holution is a creative technology agency that we do everything in-house. So all everything we do, we have a strategy team, a creative team, and a tech team. And between us, we have now 36 people. We are 10 years old next year, and we started, our founder, Jonathan, was a luxury marketer in the jewellery sector, and he realised very early that there was a space in the luxury jewellery sector for technology, and we started developing our own augmented reality platforms, some which were web-based and some which were app-based. We then moved into experimenting with a few other different technologies. We've worked with large brands like BMW and Uniqlo to luxury brands like LVMH and Hermes. And then we kind of moved from jewellery into makeup. And we realised that for every project we do, for every kind of idea that we come up with, we never think about it from the technology perspective, first of all. We always look at the sociology and the psychology of where is the consumer needs, where is the enlightenment in terms of consumer experience, and where is there a pain point that we can really potentially overcome or disrupt, since that's one of the themes on the panel as well. So, for example, we did a lot of research with women who said that when they try on makeup, they find it quite an intimidating experience, sometimes in kind of beauty halls or department stores. Other times when they're going to into like a drugstore environment, you sometimes are in a hurry and it's difficult to try stuff on. So we came up with a few different augmented reality experiences where you can, for example, I can see someone in the audience's makeup that I like, I can take a picture of it, and then that goes up into the cloud and then comes down and gives me a brand's perception of what that makeup will look like on me, and then I can try it on and purchase it. We did that for one of our clients, Rimmel. That's just a brief introduction, very briefly into kind of what we're doing at the moment, but what we are very excited about in terms of augmented reality is, because of Pokemon Go, because of Snapchat, that more consumers know what augmented reality is. They know that it's kind of embedded in their phone, with all the recent announcements in the last few weeks with Apple and also with Facebook. It really is a tool that has become more cost-effective as well for retailers, designers, property agents to use in a fun way to help create information about how we can improve the customer journey. That's probably the thing that we're most passionate about.
Thank you very much. Stuart, can I come to you for your introduction and your key trends?
Yeah, of course. So I founded Watchfinder back in 2000. Inception, it's an online company. So I was fascinated with the internet and Google when I first started using it in maybe 97. We took our lead really from the car industry at the time, looking at the car industry, and if you're a person of a certain age like I am, you might be able to remember what the impression of pre-owned car sales was like back in the 80s. And there was a journey that the car industry went on, and the pre-owned inventory stopped being something that was purchased in a fairly untrustworthy manner to be fully integrated with the luxury brand's presentation. And at the time when I started doing this, the watch industry was the antithesis of that, and we couldn't understand why. So our sort of challenge was to go about using the internet and have the manufacturers essentially stop looking at the inventory as a competitor and as a sort of a complementary service that could almost drive new watch sales. So that was sort of the inception, and we started merrily on our way. For the purposes of what we're going to talk about today, we had probably been working for the best part of 10 years, and we realised that, purely online, and we realised that the business was crying out for a store. That might be something to do with the product itself and maybe the average basket size. So because our average product is £5,000 plus, and because there's a lot of aesthetic considerations when you're buying inventory from us, the store ticks an awful lot of boxes. And the discussions back in 2010 were whether it would come out of the marketing budget. It wasn't really a high-level operational consideration. But when we launched a store, we realised immediately that it was absolutely integral to the success of the organisation going forward. Straight away, within the first month, 90+% of all the customers were new to the business, and that's unusual for us. We have a sort of 35% existing client rate. And all but one of those customers knew the brand. So immediately we saw that stores could be used as a tipping point, as a trust component. Moving on from there, the stores themselves actually added value to the online proposition. So we saw that our conversions went up as soon as we washed stores into who we were. I think it enabled us to differentiate from sort of the hoi polloi. And again, the trust element that I referred to added extreme value to the online consumer. I'll sort of go into various reasons as to why I think that is. But moving on from there, we've now got 6 stores across the UK. It's become probably the key focus over the next 12 months to increase our footprint here in the UK. And probably by the end of the financial year, early next year, we'll have a 50-50 split between online and retail sales.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I was going to say, just reflecting on those last 2 introductions, it's interesting that we're talking about tech, but we're talking about tech in the context of bricks and mortar. We're not talking about tech replacing the need for high street shopping centres. So for the landlords in the audience, relief. Ben, could you maybe introduce yourself and reflect on that point? You know, are we looking at a demise of bricks and mortars in the long term, or is the future looking rosy?
Okay, so very quick intro to me and my role and what that actually means in terms of the things that I do at Deloitte. So I look after our programme of research and thought leadership. I also look after our marketing across the whole retail and consumer area. I deal with all of the press and media and conferences like this, and I also work very closely with the senior leadership of our major retail clients, from the kind of audit size of the business, so people like Tesco and M&S and Kingfisher, all the way through to sort of our digital agency, Deloitte Digital, and the sort of exciting and interesting things we're doing around e-commerce and mobile commerce with them. So I guess my view around this and thinking about trends, which I spend a lot of time thinking about within retail and consumer, is that one of the sort of the really big trends that we flagged up this year was actually about e-commerce. Now, when you start talking about e-commerce in 2017, then people start to look very confused. We know about this, it's big, it's growing, etc. But my challenge is really that I don't think people do fully understand exactly that we're at day 2 of the journey into e-commerce. It's very far from over. The big disruption from e-commerce is still to come. And the reason that we think that is because it's only now that we're starting to see pure players of significant scale to really begin to sort of to leverage that scale and drive change within the market. We're also beginning to see that for many of the biggest retailers in the UK and around the world, e-commerce is ceasing to be a channel, and it's fast becoming the channel, as e-commerce and m-commerce sales are approaching 30, 40, 50% of sales at some of the biggest retailers. And at that point, it's something that you then have to reorganise your business, reorganise your customer engagement around entirely. It's not something that can be run as a sideshow because it's become the main show. And, you know, this growth is going to impact upon the store portfolio. It is going to impact upon demand for space. But to my mind, that doesn't mean that stores are going to become less important. I think that you could actually easily argue the opposite in terms of they're going to be more important than ever. It's just that they may not be delivering the same kind of direct sales and revenue, which makes it much harder for the businesses to manage. So hopefully there's a few points that everyone else can chip in on.
Thank you very much for that, Ben. Philip, what are your thoughts?
Well, if I start with telling a little bit about myself and my background. I was born in Denmark and moved over here in '85 and was a student, did a degree in photography. Worked for 20 years as a photographer, got disheartened with digital photography and was looking for a new way of making a living. I knew about the brand Tiger in Denmark from visiting Denmark, and happened to be in the same table tennis team as the founder of Tiger back when I was 8 and he was 13, but we still remembered each other. And we bumped into each other socially in Copenhagen and talked informally about opening a Tiger shop in the UK. And we did so in 2005 in Basingstoke, very small setup. We had £200,000 as a total capital to start a shop and buy the inventory and do the refurbishments and pay the lawyers and stamp duty and whatever else needs to be done. And it was an amazing journey that started there, and Tiger was incredibly well visited and incredibly well received from day one. It had something that, it had an immediateness that I think few retailers or institutions can have, where you are an unknown brand, you open up and on day one it feels like Christmas. And I thought that was normal in retail, that you just open a shop and all shops are that busy. And that's the credit to the founder and the brand back in Denmark, that was what they sent over to the UK, and the British consumer took to it pretty much immediately. We were in some ways quite lucky that we headed straight into a financial crisis of some incredible dimensions, because there was no capital available for startups, and landlords were pretty difficult. So it meant that expansion was very slow and to begin with, and that we expanded from retained profits. We never took out any loans, and that meant that in that period when other retailers were expanding really quickly, we took our time. And with hindsight, I now look back and say we didn't end up with a huge inflated portfolio of stores that no longer would be relevant. I think the landscape has changed so dramatically that at the time, in 2005, there was no internet at all, or certainly nothing of any volume. And when we were discussing how many shops we were going to open in the UK population is about 12 times the Danish population. In Denmark there was 50 stores, so we came to a figure of about 600 stores. If you ask me this question now, 100 stores is more than plenty. I think that the journey, both for myself and for the team that was around me, has been incredibly rewarding. And we've gone through in dealing with landlords, we've gone through being a start-up to being an established, with great covenant and a brand that all landlords seem to be very keen to get. And of course it makes you think a lot about that relationship, and I think that is one of the key things that need to be looked at for the future, both of landlords and retailers, that relationship is more partnership than it is us and them. If I think a little bit about what I think about the key trends in disrupting retail, I think that the word disruptive is very inflated. There are a few disruptors around, and of course technology are changing things. But I also think that the core in retail has been forgotten in many instances. And the core in retail is what justifies that you can charge more than what you buy for, what justifies you that you make a profit. And you come down to concept. And I think that when you're in this sort of environment or other retail conference environments, you talk channels, you talk technology, you talk logistics. But who talks concept? Nobody talks concept. And I think that's such a weakness, and I think it's, call it chicken, that you're chickening it out. You're hiding behind outside developments rather than looking inwards and look at yourself and say, what is it I'm doing? Am I doing something that is still relevant? If you look at the retailers that's disappeared, and a lot of them would say they were victim of disruption or victims of changing technology, I actually don't think that's the case at all. I think that it's purely down to that their concepts have become irrelevant, they've fallen asleep, they've taken their foot off the gas and thought they could just have whatever they had 10 years ago and that will remain. I think that the pace of change is just going to increase, and as a retailer and as a landlord, if you're not on board with that, then I think you have a bleak future.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And can you give us a sneak into your next venture, or is that top secret? They're very trustworthy here. They've all been vetted. They're all good. You can share your secrets with us.
Well, I came out of Tiger with a sort of an idea of having a year off, but it doesn't sit well with my nature. And I think that you have in the Gulf states and you have in Asia, you have companies that operate lots of brands, and I think that that's where beer retail is heading. I'm in talks with a number of foreign brands about bringing them to the UK, and I think that's what beer retail will develop into.
Did you just avoid the question? I mean, it's impressive. You avoided the question. Thank you.
I don't think I did.
And I'm going to be coming to you guys very shortly for questions. Philip posing some very challenging thoughts there that actually, disruption is more about doing retail well and having a strong concept, and that those that can't thrive in this very fast-changing environment are just missing the doing the fundamentals. I think that's what you're saying. So can you reflect on that? I'm coming to you guys for questions very shortly, but before I do that, Nick, could you introduce yourself?
Yep. Hello, everybody. I developed a technology which is a cloud-based identity solution, which we originally launched at music festivals as a cashless solution, so that all you needed to do was be there to pay for something. So what we do, it's a vein ID system. It's developed by Hitachi in Japan, initially as a medical device to spot the early signs of heart disease and diabetes. And what we do is we build a 3D pattern of veins inside your finger, and we can map that very accurately, and we can identify you very quickly. So we link your debit cards, credit cards, tickets, loyalty cards, any form of your identity we can tokenize and link to this token. At a festival, the idea was to reduce queues, it was to bring more relevance, it was to understand what consumers were doing, and a better consumer experience. That was 2012, and it's been quite a long journey of getting people to trust and understand what we're trying to do, and get the approvals from the relevant people like Visa and MasterCard to be able to operate. It's obviously a massively changing world, and I'm quite new to retail in the last couple of years, really. In terms of the same issues are affecting retail in terms of how do you bring more relevance? How do you bring a better customer experience? How do you marry that online with who's in store? How do you identify your consumer? So we're in the press at the moment because we went live in a supermarket yesterday in London inside a university. And the whole idea behind that is it's Brunel University. It's a campus. There's 15,000 people on site. They're trying to reduce the amount of cash. There's 16 points of cash coming into that campus university. It's about £22 million a year or something. And just counting that cash before it gets to cash office, I think each is counted 4 times, and it loses some on every step. So we are now in Cost Cutter. That is age verification, it is payment, and it is loyalty. So within 200 milliseconds, I think the whole transaction takes about 1.5 seconds. You are age verified, so that if you're buying alcohol, self-service starts to improve. Loyalty points can be redeemed and given automatically. So I think I'm starting to understand retail, and coming here has been brilliant in terms of understanding how the relationships work between retail and between landlords. I think that's really relevant to how this disruption is going on in terms of everybody rethinking where their position is, and people starting to work together. There's no point having a mall with retailers in there that aren't doing very well in terms of how can you help them with their businesses? How can you create relevance to people to come to that mall? Because to me, any retailer that brings a customer into that mall is good for everybody. So, yeah, that's where we are at the moment.
Thank you very much, Nick.
Okay.
Guys, we have entertained you now for 25 minutes. Any questions, any thoughts that have been provoked from the panel here? We have roving mics in the audience, I believe. I just don't see any hands going up. Any thoughts? Any reflections? Question over here. Thank you, sir.
Yes, thank you. My name is Sean Ryder from Wychavon District Council, which is the east half of Worcestershire, covering the towns of Droitwich and Pershore. I saw the finger recognition system yesterday, and I thought, immediately thought, before realising it was going to Brunel University, this is something that young people are really going to latch on to. My own daughter's at university at the moment, and being daughters, carrying cash and cards is an issue for them. So seeing that system, I just thought is perfect for them, and latching on to young people will drive it as they age and grow older. More people demand it, and so hopefully it will roll out and become a well-used scheme. I was interested in. I don't think. You did avoid the question. I was interested in what you're saying about looking at other franchises internationally that might work well in the UK. And I think perhaps where you might do better than others is, of course, you have got that track record, and what sort of we find as local authority working with shopping centre owners and developers, they're always looking for strength of covenant. And with franchisees, you never know necessarily who you're going to get. So I think having that track record will hopefully enable you to bring some brands to the UK that will do really well. But what I'm hearing overall is that the town centres of the future are going to be really interesting places, because rather than the sort of towns where every shop was the same, looking from the watchfinder's perspective, it's those sort of shops that where you're sort of really connecting that experience and selling something that's I suppose unique and people want to feel and touch and be part of before they buy, is where the future of the high street is. And having all those quite sort of unique brands and unique offers, I think bodes well for what the high street might look like in the future.
So your reflection is that actually we're going to end up with potentially much more diverse high streets rather than
Absolutely, yes.
Lots of the same brands, much more diversity on the high street?
Smaller high streets, I think it's fair to say, but yeah, far more interesting, and there's definitely a future there for them, which is encouraging.
Right, thank you very much. Ben, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, you represent some of the biggest retailers. Do you see them moving off the high street in replacement for smaller retailers?
I think there are definitely a lot of large retailers that have more space than they believe that they need for the future. But at the same time, I guess we've seen over the last 10 years that there have been a number of different types of leisure or hospitality businesses which have stepped up to fill that gap. And increasingly, we're starting to see across the sort of consumer companies that I work with, so kind of from manufacturers through the food service into retail, is that they're increasingly looking to acquire, develop retail capability. So both in terms of e-commerce, but also in terms of physical retail. So I think that there's going to be, it's exciting for the sort of the retail property world, because as the sort of some of the older, more established businesses might be retrenching, there are new businesses, car manufacturers, CPG manufacturers, new concepts in leisure and fitness that are developing and coming over here, which are stepping up to take that space. And I think that it's absolutely right. It's creating a much more exciting and reinvigorated sort of high street and shopping centre.
Philip, what are your thoughts in terms of that, the high street of the future, the town centre of the future?
Well, I think it depends if they pick up on the local population, just like Tom in his presentation on Urban Specialists making very clear yesterday, that the local population want vibrancy, they want somewhere where they can go out locally. I think Tom's take on the future of the car was really interesting, and also if you relate that to retail, that the time when you drove out to an out-of-town shopping environment to do your weekly shop and driving back, I think for urban dwellers, I think that's the past. you are much more likely to go to a good quality convenience store and buy something locally, and that will be great for the other retailers who are there. So I actually think your point is good and very valid, that the big box retail, I think, has really probably had it, certainly in the way we were used to, and it will move to more vibrant, more choice, more popping in, spending a few quid rather than a big trip out.
Cool. Thank you very much. Any more questions? A couple of questions here. Lady in the middle, and then the lady over on my right-hand side.
It's Trudy Barnard from Newcastle, under Lyme Borough Council in Staffordshire. This feels like it's echoing. Is it horribly loud or anything? No? Okay.
It's good.
Good. I'm very interested in some of the comments you've been making. We have a situation in Newcastle where we feel we're sandwiched between our large businesses are going to out of town, our small independents are going to a local sort of tourist destination just down the road. I appreciate some of the things you're saying, but that we need to look at other alternatives. A lot of those seem to apply to big cities, so thinking about the smaller town centres, but also what else should we be doing to create an environment where people want to invest and people want to visit?
Corinna, could you maybe give a tech angle on that question, on Trudy's question?
Well, one of the things that I mentioned, that when we approach kind of any problem or any ideas, that we always do a decent amount of consumer research and trying to do it in a non-traditional way. So we kind of steer away from like large-scale surveys and things like that. We do a lot of going to locations to observe people in the wild, so to speak, to look at how they behave, and then also to do one-on-one interviews or focus groups. And then from that, we try to create experience maps, again, to look at what makes people happy, where are the friction points in the journey, whether it's buying a pint of milk or buying a £15,000 watch. And I think it's only from that when you start to map out where the gaps are and where the potentials are, and what I think we should be doing that we're not doing at the moment is everybody in their own individual businesses, and even sometimes they're not doing that. So some of the clients have never done an experience map or looked at how their customer does their journey, is that we should all be doing it together, everybody in the audience as well, to say that it's only when we map it out together that we can come up with a kind of collaborative solution and really think about things from a bigger picture.
Okay, thank you. And what role does AR, augmented reality and artificial intelligence and big data have in answering Trudy's question? Because you can collect, an experience map is one thing, but actually there's huge amounts of data you can collect about what consumers do.
To the comment I just made, that if we did do that in an open source way, that we could view everybody's together, we could create algorithms that could predict or suggest solutions for some of the problems that we've just talked about. I think from an augmented perspective, we can use technology to view how we want to, look at our high streets or what we want to see, where I think it offers new flexibilities in terms of, for us, augmented try-on in terms of makeup, but that's, if everybody's been talking about on Twitter recently, the IKEA new AR experience, and people are putting sofas in tube stations and things like that, which is not where we're going necessarily, but it's good to see people experimenting with technology in that context. I haven't answered your question because it's not an easy question to answer, but for me it's about joining the dots within an organisation and using technology to do that, but also doing that with your stakeholders as well.
I think the point that I was trying to... There's a lot of noise happening behind us. There's it's a big corridor behind us, lots of people going on. I think the question I had was more around, do you install CCTV cameras in every town centre, watch what people do use facial recognition, use behavioural analytics, gather all that information, create a big brother database, and then that tells you
That
how
sounds
to
like
make.
a leading question.
It is a leading question.
My answer is no. I think that's part of it, but it has to be in conjunction with all the other things as well. There has to be the qualitative aspects as well as those, and I don't think from the clients we deal with and the conversations we have, we're not at that stage yet. I would suggest that what you're talking about is at least 5 years away.
Okay, thank you. Can we go to the next question here, please?
Tanya Love from Faulkner Brown's Architects. We've heard quite a bit in the last couple of days about apps, and Karina's just mentioned one in relation to makeup, where you can take photos of people and copy what they're looking to find what they're wearing or what they're wearing on the face. I don't want that kind of technology. I really enjoy finding interesting pieces of jewellery or clothes and putting them together in my own way, and I don't want people copying that. And I would say there's plenty of other people in this room that maybe feel the same, I don't know, but I don't like that technology.
That's okay.
I'm heckling.
As kind of
Thank you for that heckle. More heckling. I applaud heckling. Karina, it's your heckle.
As kind of a creative technology provider, we need to then look at your journey, again, back to that, and think about, is there any way that we can provide something technology-based to help you with that, even if you just want to contain what you've created yourself? Or are we better suited looking for a problem or a solution with another person? So I think it's good anyway, but it's still important to understand your journey and think about what makes you excited, because that might give us a creative solution for something else.
Stuart, can you respond to our heckler? Tanya, a very good heckler, sorry. Because you've done online, you've gone from online to bricks and mortar.
Yeah, I mean, look, we have apps that we use. The weird thing about apps is you're perfectly entitled not to use them. I think I totally agree with the response that was just given. Maybe just referring back to the previous question, if I may. It's interesting from my perspective that we are unusual in that we've come offline. We're a big online proposition, and now we're sort of quite aggressively looking for stores and a big sort of retail footprint around the UK. And there are certain assumptions that come with that we bring with us. So collecting data is absolutely fundamental to what we do. We've done it since day one. You know, I know the email address and contact details of every customer I've ever dealt with, and there are lots of them. And it's been quite fascinating for me coming into the retail environment where that seems to be, you know, it's a well-trodden path now, but it's not maybe front and centre. Provision of you know, just what I consider basic facilities like adequate broadband access and, you know, decent IP phone systems, and these maybe are things that we've struggled to get. Even some of the big retail centres that we're working in, I've just found that a little bit unusual, and I think the main point is the customer. It's all about the customer. You have to accept that all my responses are caveated that we have a very blinkered perspective on the world because of the quite unique nature of what we do. But look, what I have found in interacting with the agents and landlords is they're very interested in my performance, but they're not interested in my commentary around how we can both improve the situation from the perspective of the customer. So I think a conversation and a dialogue is always important. And I think taking everyone's sort of perspective on how we can improve things, not necessarily to always act on them, but it gives a broader understanding of maybe, you know, how you can take things forward.
Any landlords in the audience that want to respond to Stuart's counter-heckle? No? Okay. Nick, what are your thoughts on this? The role of technology?
You know, an app is just a way that we interface with the consumer and how we hopefully collect data, share information. I think data's key. When you're looking at a town centre these days, it's the whole experience of you arriving into town, trying to find a parking space, having to pay for that, and then how do you pay for that? So then going shopping, I think if you had some sort of, if everybody was a little bit more open, and if there was a way of sort of you could remain anonymous, you can share information with a retailer, that when you shopped within a retailer, that then credited your parking. It's that whole experience. And Tanya, with regards to an app, there'll be an app that suits you because in the way that you like to shop, the stuff that you want to do. You want to find little boutique-y, out the way, around the corner places. How do you find that? You know, and are those people still being invited into the shopping centres? It tends to be that you just find big high street brands, and the little ones are sort of never given an opportunity. And I think King's Cross is getting it right. It was interesting. I don't know who I was talking to about King's Cross the other day. Was it you, Philip? I can't remember.
Yeah.
They've done a very interesting way of bringing interesting businesses in. It isn't just your standard high street. There's some innovative businesses, small operators, there's innovation, there's all sorts going on, and it really is working. They're finding a way to sort of engage, bring in, and look after the consumer and give them a great experience. I don't think parking's an issue there. None of us drive in London, you know, we all get public transport, which makes it interesting. But then what if, you know, I get credits for that by going to that area and being involved. So I think it's a bit of everything, really. It's a bit of us having an app, but then everybody being involved in it. It seems to be that everybody's got their own loyalty cards, everybody's got their own isolationist way of thinking about their retailer. But it needs to be bigger than that. Everybody needs to sort of, you know, we're talking about big data, and it's going to be useful to us. How can we get involved with big data and still feel that our privacy is protected? All those things.
Okay. I'm going to pose a question to the panel just around this concept of disruption, because I think we're all being dreadfully polite, which is nice. You know, it's a Thursday morning. We're in company, but I'm a bit worried that we're not quite getting into the crux of this issue of disruption and what the key trends are. And you know, we're all familiar with the disruption that Uber has brought, the taxi industry and the automotive industry. We're familiar with what Airbnb are doing to hospitality and hotels. What from your perspectives, is really causing disruption? Really good examples of things that are disrupting the retail sector or the property retail sector, the bricks and mortar sector. Maybe Ben, you could start.
Okay, so I think with a little bit of context, I think that you know, there's been a lot of talk about disruption for a number of years. I think at the heart of it, I really kind of agree with Philip that disruption, previously known as innovation. So I think, was the introduction of the first self-service supermarket a disruption? Of course it was, but it was presented as an innovation. And there seems to have been some point at which the switch has flipped and innovation is now bad and the negative is accentuated. And I think a lot of that is to do with the fact that increasingly disruptions or innovation or change or whatever you want to call it is being driven by the consumer and not by the retailer. And I think that's the problem, really, is that the consumer is able to move much faster than the retailer. So retail, traditionally, retail systems, retail technology, it's 10, it's 15, it's 20-year IT roadmaps. Well, that doesn't work anymore. But how do you change that investment and development and implementation cycle to reflect the fact that the OS system changes two or three times a year? So I think that's the big challenge so fundamentally the biggest disruption in retail for me is how retailers can keep up with the consumer. There's really no chance of getting ahead of them. It's all about catch up.
And do you have a favourite example at the moment where you go, wow, that's innovation. I really like what these guys are doing here?
So one that I think is quite interesting to watch is, for everyone to watch around the whole kind of voice element of this, right? So your contrarians will point to the number of devices sold. It's relatively small. It's relatively limited in terms of the functionality. But if you look at some of the data that's being reported from the US in terms of the way that the people who are using devices like Google Home, like Amazon's Alexa-based devices, it's showing that people are shopping differently, and it's potentially very dangerous for brands and for retailers because people are shopping for the thing, the category, and not for the brand. So all of a sudden, the massive investments in the past that have been made in in-store marketing, shopper marketing, point-of-sales material, if somebody's just asking for tissues or toilet roll, or floor cleaner or whatever it goes on to be, black shoes, plimsolls, then how does that sort of whole process of brand development, proposition development insert itself into that process? Or does it just have to say, that's gone? Now, if you are a number 1, 2 or 3 brand, that might reinforce your position, because people might ask for Kleenex, they might ask for a Hoover, etc. But if you are a different level of brand, then are you risking being cut out of what will grow to be, I'm sure, a very big channel? Now, lots of retailers are experimenting with this fast, but you look at my domestic ethnographic research, consisting on looking at the way that kids are picking this stuff up so quickly and naturally interfacing. Voice is a much more natural way to interface with something than typing everything down on a increasingly small keyboard. So I think there's a big change there that's coming, and a big challenge for retailers and brands to deal with.
So just to pick up on that, do you envisage me going to Marks and Spencer and asking for a pinstripe suit, or another pinstripe suit, and that's what, and that's essentially I'll just be buying pinstripe suits for the rest of my life, which I've always done.
I think it's just going to be increasingly the natural way that people interface with technology. So be it in store, be it in the car, be it in the home, it's going to be the natural way to interface, and therefore, why would that be any different for shopping?
Very interesting. So shops will become much noisier places. Thank you, Ben. Karina. Oh, sorry, Philip.
Just to pick up on what you were saying, I think that single brand retailers, I think, have a great future. I think that the multi-brand retailers are the ones who generally have real problems. And that also sits well with what you're saying. I think because then the retailer then control the whole process if it is just one brand. I just read Steve Jobs' biography, and if you do read it, it's 600 pages, and you can start on 598, and the other 600 are also relevant. But he opened shops not to make money, but he opened shops because he wanted to control the environment that his fantastic products were sold in. One of the things I did before coming here is I asked friends and family, a bit of a focus group, which retailer do you go to and you look forward to it, or which retailer deliver according to expectations? And 2 stores came up all the time. One was Primark and one was Apple. And they're very, very diverse in price, in experience. And I think for me that tells really the story. That I hear all these things and I don't understand what you're talking about, sort of on the whole. But to me, both of them, it is super vibrant. You go in there, you go to Primark, and I love going to Primark because there's an energy in Primark, a real retailer's energy. And I spent 2 hours in Apple. And I spent the fortune of £2.49 per month for some cloud-based storage. But I sat with a fantastic young guy who explains loads of things that I didn't know. And that was my commitment out. Now Apple have got a lifetime commitment likely from myself. So I think that the multi-branded stores, where I think they're the ones that really need to define. I think John Lewis is absolutely fine, and because they're so clear in their concept. But the other retailers who are general branders and have lots of choice for the same item, I think they're in real trouble.
Okay. John Lewis in the audience? No, but if you know somebody from John Lewis, they're all okay. Thank you. Stuart, do you want your key disruptor? What do you see? What are the key thing and a good example of it as well? I'm trying to get to the nuts and bolts of this.
So what disruption? Like conceptually, I think from my perspective, I think when people talk about disruptive situations, it seems to have developed a negative connotation. And I don't understand that at all. That doesn't make any sense to me, because disruption is essentially change, and there's a maxim, change is good. And, if things change, they change for the better invariably, because they're driven by usually external processes, in this case the customer. And I think everyone has to get on board and realise that, they need to understand disruptive situations, embrace them, learn from them, and move forward. I also think that there are situations where you get a sort of symbiotic disruption. And actually, you can have the same set of circumstances with the same players, but a tweak or a change can actually benefit everyone involved in the loop. It doesn't necessarily mean that someone loses and someone wins. I think there are always efficiencies and improvements that can be made. again, only speaking from my own perspective, that's something that we try to do in the sort of new territories that we move into. We're not there wanting to beat up the opposition, we're wanting to try and add value. So that's my take on disruption.
So do you see something in particular now where you think that's a great example, either a retailer or a landlord or something that's happening other than yourself?
Look, we are very myopic. So we'll go into a retail environment and we will look to add value when we move in there. So something unique that we do that no one else really does is we part exchange. So we're very keen to buy the inventory back. That works for the retail environment because it brings the customer in much more frequently. We've managed to change the buy cycle from 4 years to 18 months just by adopting this policy. But what that's also enabled us to do is assist what some people perceive to be our competitors. So actually, on an operational level, lots of people selling new inventory actually send their customers to us to sell us the watches on the wrist so we can pay them to help reconcile the sale of a new watch, which we don't touch. So that's where everyone wins.
Okay. Thank you very much. Corinna, where are the Ubers and the Airbnbs in retail?
I think in the kind of disruption versus innovation kind of question, I think if you don't innovate, then you will be disrupted. So it'll either happen to you or you'll be the one who will be the one that's doing it. And I think that's, to me, a very interesting motivator to ensure that you do experiment, that you do always keep time on a weekly or a monthly basis within your organisation to have a bit of a kind of bigger picture, collaborate with other people. I think in terms of where we see the sector being disrupted, I think things like on-demand manufacturing, we were talking there about the kind of the nature of the high street. I think in the future, I think the big box retailers and also on the high streets, there will be manufacturing happening there and then, whether it's in a 3D printed kind of way or whether it's a craftsmanship way. I think that holds kind of equally strong potential. I think we'll see more in terms of related to that co-creation and on-demand manufacturing. So there's a platform in fashion at the moment called Away to Mars, and the guy who started that, asks people, what are you excited about? What are you interested in? And it asks people to submit to like an online mood board, and then that then gets translated into products that people design, and then everybody kind of designs it together, and then they vote on which ones are the best, and only the best ones get manufactured. So it's a nice kind of ethical loop as well. And then if you look kind of at the bigger picture, people like Farfetch, who announced this year their Store of the Future approach, and it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's a modular approach where they offer in-store technology, they offer online solutions, but all on a very kind of segmented and kind of pick-and-mix mentality that's constantly evolving, because I think the one-size-fits-all approach just really doesn't work, and it's about small chunks, testing and learning and testing and learning.
Thank you very much. Nick, finally, you're already introducing a technology that potentially could change how we purchase everything.
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to relevance for me. I think there's loads of people using technology really well. I think I'm really waiting to see somebody that introduces a piece of technology that everybody wants to use. So if you take a shopping mall, it's all about everybody collaborating. What piece of technology are they going to implement that everybody will share, that you can make a very, very relevant experience for me coming in? There's some very interesting apps out there that I use. One of them is called Rooma, which is like an Airbnb, but it's for hotel rooms. So if I've already got a hotel room, can't make it anymore, I can stick it on Rooma, and I can pick it up really cheaply. So that's really very interesting for me. And I was hearing somebody here last night saying they've got a spare room. Stick it on Rooma. So Far Sounds is another one. It's how you can have a gig in your living room and invite people in to come see it. So I arrive in Liverpool and it geolocates me, knows my taste in music, and it just shows me where a whole load of little parties are going on that I'm available to go to. I think we're at the beginning. We've had iPhones for quite a while, and apps are starting to become more interesting. I like the Alexa concept and the ideas that you were talking about, and I felt very funny yesterday when it was on the news as this woman kept on having parcels delivered to her home, and she's wondering what was going on, and it turned out to be her parrot imitating her and using Alexa for ordering off Amazon. That was brilliant. But I think technology is going to be the innovator. It's about as soon as they embrace it, as soon as they sort of start to collaborate in together, that would help.
I think I'd like to add to that as well that peer-to-peer retail hasn't quite kind of transcended from online to offline yet. If you think of like traditional car boot sales and eBay, some kind of mashup of that on the high street, I think would be very interesting.
So, ladies and gentlemen, you've heard some of the key disruptors. Any thoughts, questions, heckles? A couple of questions over here.
Duncan Cox, I'm an engineer, and so I'm hearing sort of a problem, and I'm a problem solver, so I'm intrigued to hear from the panel. The lady from Newcastle on the Line sort of mentioned this issue where they have a problem, and I'm intrigued to know, in the world of needing destination and primary healthcare providers and retailers, etc., who, in the panel's view, should be taking the lead in the solution of the problems that the lady from Newcastle on the Line was hinting at?
I think the most innovative, cleverest people and the people who are most brave, and I think it doesn't matter what sector they're from, as long as they do it and as long as they come together.
Philip, do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't feel... No.
You can't comment the first time. Ben, any thoughts?
Well, I think what sometimes, to my experience, holds back the sort of rate of change in some of those sort of town centre, high street environments is to do with the ownership structure. So it's easier for a retail park owner or a shopping centre owner to deliver a level of experience that's consistent and in line with their sort of customer demographics because they're in control. It's often harder for town centres and high streets to do that because of the sort of dispersion of ownership within that. So I think there's been lots of pilots and tests of different ways of collaborating and bringing that together. But maybe as to who should lead that, I don't think that it would work with anyone leading it particularly. I think it's got to be a collaboration amongst those various stakeholders with sort of shared aims and objectives around keeping that environment alive and ensuring that it delivers the experience that that customer, that demographic, that neighbourhood needs.
Oh, thank you. I think we've got one question just over to my left.
Hi, Trudy Strip from Connemara. There's a quote that I like, which is, if you don't like change, you're going to like irrelevance even less. And how do you think that reflects in the increasing echo chamber that we seem to be living in?
Sorry, Trudy, can you just repeat the question? Because ironically, it's also a little bit echoey in here. So can you just repeat the question again?
Yeah, the quote that I keep returning to is, if you don't like change, you're going to like irrelevance even less. And how do you think that equates to the increasing echo chamber of a world we're living in?
That's great. That is a fantastic final question as we race towards the last few minutes of our panel. I'm going to ask everyone in a loop, I think starting at Corinna, going this way, in order to respond to that question.
Couldn't quite hear it.
Sorry, Trudy. It's if you don't like change, you'll like irrelevance less. Can we get a mic to Trudy? Sorry. Roving mic people. Sound people at the back. Sorry, just over to Trudy again. Thank you.
I think I can start answering in the short term, which is that we need new measures of, we need new KPIs. I think until we start measuring things and measuring success slightly differently, if we keep on using the same traditional measurements, we'll keep on creating the same types of ideas. I think that's quite critical in that change.
Okay. Trudy, could you just repeat the question again for Philip?
If you don't like change, you're going to like irrelevance even less.
Absolutely. I mean, relevance is, I don't know how many times I have preached to my team that relevant is all what Tiger was about, and if we were not relevant, we should just close down. So change is fantastic, and you've got to embrace it, you've got to enhance it, you've got to work for change, you've got to be wide open to it. I think some of the debates that's going on in relation to Brexit is very depressing in that sense that we want to be closing up. You've got to be outwards, you've got to be welcoming, you've got to be taking on board what people bring. So if you think that you can stand still, you can't stand still in any business. You've got to be embracing it and move on.
Thank you. Nick, if you don't like change, you will like irrelevance less.
Yeah, I agree. I think change is all about technology for me, really. You know, it's what's driving everything. It's what's driving change in retail. I completely agree with the quote. I don't know what more I can say in terms of how important relevance is.
Yeah, look, it provides its own answer, doesn't it? The quote. I mean, Darwin probably had a lot to say on this. If you become irrelevant, you just disappear and the world moves on. I think the second part of your question is quite interesting, the echo chamber reference. I think you've got to follow your own path. I think, there are people who spend a bit much time listening to a public opinion. There was a reference to Steve Jobs, perceived as a very successful entrepreneur, businessman. I don't think he spent too much time listening to other people's opinions. He had a clear vision, a clear understanding of what he wanted to achieve, and he went and understood it. I think you rely on people nearest and dearest you and people whose opinions you trust. But again, the general echo, I think that will look after itself.
And Ben?
I think the thing to add to this discussion, I agree with pretty much everything that's been said so far, is that I think the significant thing for me is really that the rate of change is still accelerating. So there's a term that people use a lot when they're talking about the sort of change that business requires at the moment around digital transformation. It's a word that we use. We're guilty of this as well. But for me, I think it's potentially a deceptive term because that sort of suggests that there's a beginning and an end. But what I think we're really seeing is that transformation is going to be ongoing for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, potentially ongoing, because the sort of wave after wave of technology is coming through, the consumer is sort of changing their behaviour and evolving in that sense. And in terms of the sort of voices, a plurality of voices that we have to listen to around this, I think there's only one that people should be listening to, and that's the customer.
Profound words indeed from my panel. It is amazing how 60 minutes can fly by, but we are unfortunately out of time, ladies and gentlemen, which means that the only thing left for me to do is to thank my panellists, Ben, Stuart, Nick, Philip and Corinna, and all of yourselves for being a fantastic audience. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.